I'm back with more facial hair and more thoughts about 1917. It's kind of funny, I recently watched my first review of this movie, and it almost seemed like I was kind of holding back criticism for it. I'm definitely the kind of guy that buys into hype, but that doesn't necessarily take away from my tastes or my natural reaction to things. And I've mentioned this in other videos, but a perfect example is in The Force Awakens when Rey first gets the lightsaber through the use of the Force, and the entire theater erupted in applause, and I just sat there kind of confused. So that's kind of a pretty good example of the fact that my tastes are definitely my own, even though I can buy into the hype. And I think in the case of 1917, I might have bought into it a little too much. There are plenty of things wrong with this movie. Now, right off the bat, I'm not saying that it's a bad film. I think that the directorial achievement is astounding. The fact that they were able to get a war film in one shot, I think will pave the way for even more ambitious one shot movies. I mean, we don't even know what's next. I hope that there maybe is a sci fi genre that's one shot, or perhaps even more challenging, a drama movie that's one shot. And I say more challenging because the emotional fermata that you have to hold in order to maintain a certain level of emotion for 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, is very, very difficult as an actor to do. Now, granted, most of the camera takes that are in movies that are that length are only about 20 to 30 minutes, but even so, in order to string them all together, it's very difficult to do so as an actor. So I hope that the achievement of 1917 has and will pave the way for even more ambitious one-shot movies. Now, having said that, I do have some issues with it that I did not mention it in my first review. The first one being, and I touched upon this in my first review, is the fact that at times it is actually kind of boring. And perhaps this is just my fault. Perhaps it was just the marketing. Granted, I think I only might have seen like one or two trailers for this movie, but even in both trailers, the ones that were teasers that were about only 10 to 15 seconds long, it made it seem like it was going to be this really dramatic war film. But in reality, it was a film that was almost entirely relationship driven. Now, that was a pleasant surprise at the time. But when I go into a movie expecting there to be a lot of action, and in my opinion, rightfully so, considering it's about war, it was just a little bit of a letdown. Now, I know I kind of sound like a fanboy here, but I honestly feel like I'm approaching the movie from more so a craft standpoint, as in, how can this story have been done better? Because I know, I really truly believe that you can have extremely exciting and extremely dramatic sequences without any kind of violence at all. I think a perfect example of this is the movie The Hunt, starring the Mads Mikkelsen, who plays typically villainous characters, but he's actually Danish, and this is a Danish film, which is perfect because he's speaking in his native language. And oh, it's just fantastic. I don't want to say anything about it. Just go check it out. In any case, you can have scenes that are very dramatic and no action at all. The problem is that it really depends on the context. And the context of the opening of 1917 was two characters that are given orders, and now they have to go into enemy lines. Now, the build-up to this was palpable. I mean, not only do you have orders in which you almost are guaranteed that they're going to fail, and even if you thought they were going to succeed, Colin Firth's character says that you shouldn't meet any resistance, which of course means they will. But you also have the emotional investment of saying that your brother is out there. So, this makes it more dramatic. And then there's even more buildup in the sense that you realize that these two characters are not really on the same page. One really wants to go and rescue his brother, the other one's not really about it. Then you get more buildup, where that sarcastic commander or whatever says, you're not going to make it. If you do somehow make it, here's a flare, but you're not going to make it, you're going to die. Then the music builds up, so you have all these moments of tension and buildup. They get out onto the field, where it's a total wasteland with corpses and everything, and nothing happens. One of the characters gets his hand stuck in some barbed wire. They stumble upon a skeleton. They see some nasty dead horses and a lot of dead soldiers, and nothing happens. And even when they get to the front lines, the music builds and builds and builds and builds, and there's nothing. Now, of course, there is the payoff where, the rat goes over the tripwire. But did you expect that? Did anybody think that that was what was going to happen? And I don't even think that's like a good use of diverting audience expectations, because you wanted to see some fighting going on. Or if not fighting, maybe, I don't know, something different than a rat walking over tripwire. It just seemed like there was all kinds of buildup and very little payoff. It almost seemed like the movie was trolling us, to be honest, because the commander was like, "You're basically gonna die as soon as you get out there," and nothing happens at all. I was thinking of a way that they could have made this scene more dramatic and just a little bit more interesting to watch. And the one thing that I could come up with that I think would work, I have no directing experience at all or writing experience at all, so take this with a grain of salt, is like, what if they stumbled upon a corpse of a German and they like took a step back, but then like, oh, he's dead. Walk over him, keep going, and the camera is situated behind them, and then they hear a gunshot and it whizzes past their ear. They turn around and the German is standing up. He's alive. And then they just shot him really quick, like no fighting or no like back and forth, just boom, he's dead. But now they're even more paranoid. They're even more on guard. That's the kind of thing that I expected when they got out there, but instead, all they really do is struggle with crawling rats and accidentally putting their hand inside of a corpse and barbed wire. It just didn't really seem like much of a payoff. So the entire movie is essentially based off of the relationship that Schofield and Blake have together. And right off the bat, I think it's a great relationship. There are many different dynamics, between their ages, and there's many different dynamics between their personalities. One is very much a go-getter. He's kind of reckless. He's braver than Blake, I'm talking about. He's braver than Schofield. He's more exuberant, always telling funny stories even after these terrifying disasters. And I thought it was a really good kind of push and pull. And it really established the relationship quite quickly. But then Blake dies. Now, granted, I thought that it was quite daring of Sam Mendes to put that in the movie. And, granted, I was a bit slack-jawed when it actually happened. But after that, it gets just a little bit less interesting, because Schofield, the actor who plays Schofield, does a great job of carrying the film, essentially, and displaying all kinds of raw emotion to get you even more invested as the wire gets twisted tighter and tighter until the ultimate climax. But I just thought it would have been so much more interesting and so much more engaging if Blake had stayed alive, and maybe they could have developed that push and pull even further. Maybe they could have had Schofield change his mind about the danger of the mission. Or maybe Schofield could have changed Blake's mind and made him a little more cautious about what they were doing. And even if that didn't happen, the fact that there are two people instead of one automatically makes it a more fun film to watch, or at least there are more potential situations that they could have put themselves in. With any kind of fighting, they could have split up, or with any kind of fighting, you might have felt that there was more danger because there was more to be lost. So after a second viewing, I found that I didn't really agree with the fact that Blake passed. And again, it was daring. I like it when movies are daring like that and they have the confidence to toy with your emotions like that. But I've just felt like there could have been some greater moments of development between these two characters, instead of Schofield developing on his own with a lot of characters that we don't even know or care about, like that annoying carriage of extremely British soldiers. They also try to make it a bit more dramatic by including Blake's brother in the equation, but the fact that they mention that at the very beginning of the movie doesn't really get us invested that much as an audience, unless you happen to have had the experience of a brother in war. Because a lot of the reason why we like movies, to be honest, is our emotional background. One of the reasons why I loved Whiplash so much is because I had the blessing slash curse of being under a director that was almost as tyrannical as him. So my investment into that movie was far more intense and far more dramatic than someone who has not had any kind of musical background. I have no war background at all, but I suspect that a person who has had service background, and even more so, someone who has had service background with a family member in the same branch, has a lot more immediate emotional investment into a story premise that says, hey, your brother's out there. You have to go rescue him. But such as it stands, the average person, such as myself, didn't really think that, okay, like he has a brother, but we know nothing about the brother, and the brother was mentioned within 5 minutes of the movie opening, so the emotional investment is kind of at a minimum. What I'm trying to say is that basically the mission could have been anything. It could have been, they could have taken the brother out completely. They could have replaced it with a different family member. They could have really done anything with the story. So I'm not exactly sure how they could fix that problem. So maybe I don't even have the right to mention that it is a problem. But the point being is, if you're going to include something emotional like that, then it has to come at the proper time. It has to come at a time when the audience really cares about the characters and is already entirely invested in the mission that they're trying to accomplish. Probably the biggest disappointment of this movie, and also one of the most minor ones, but one that I just can't help but be affected by, is the fact that the movie cuts to black. Like, the first time I watched this movie, I was so enraptured with the drama and what was happening that I barely acknowledged my disappointment in the fact that the movie cuts to black about 3/4 in. But if you're going to do a one-shot film, and if you're going to be so committed to the fact that it is one shot, then commit to it. And perhaps Sam Mendes had the logic or the reasoning that, okay, well, if the character is knocked out, then it would stand to reason that the camera is knocked out, so to speak. But as an audience member, it just doesn't really work, because I think that there are ways of conveying passage of time in a one-shot film that sort of transcends the inherent limits of one shot. For example, in Birdman, there's a scene where the camera pans up to the night sky, and then there's a time lapse, and suddenly it's morning, and then it pans back down. There are no cuts. So I feel like maybe 1917 could have done that. They could have had Schofield fall to the ground, lingered on him for a long time to see if, as an audience, like, oh, is he dead? Is he okay? Then maybe panned away from him up to the window, have it become night, and then pan back down to him. I think that could have made it just a little bit more dramatic, because then there really would be no break at all from the tension. There really would be no break at all from the movie, which is what I want so bad in a one-shot movie. But the fact that it cut to black and held that cut for about 20 seconds was just, I don't know, just a little disappointing. For a movie as realistic as this, it was so infuriating to see a soldier not use his gun. And I don't know about you guys, but there's just one scene in particular where Schofield makes it to the French town, whose name I still can't remember, even though I've seen this movie twice. He makes it to the French town, and there's more than one scene where a French soldier is shooting at him, and essentially it might as well be a stormtrooper, because their aim is so horrendous. Even a stormtrooper could do better than them. And Schofield doesn't shoot back. He literally has a gun in his hand, and he doesn't shoot back. The second time, I don't think he has a gun. I think something might have happened to it in that certain area where he chokes that kid to death, and I think he might have forgotten it as he was running out. But the one scene in particular where he's looking up at that incredible burning building, and then, like a demon of a man, emerges out of the smoke and then walks toward him, and you're like, are you a friend or an enemy? And then he starts shooting at him and, misses from 10 yards away. And I think the first time I saw that scene, I literally whispered to myself in the theater, just shoot him. Like, you have a gun, shoot him. Isn't that the reason why you're in war? You want to stop the enemy? Do you not have any bullets left? Is your gun jammed? I mean, obviously those are legit reasons, but if that's the case, then it should have been displayed. It should have been clearly communicated in the movie that that's why he couldn't shoot him. It was ridiculous. I felt like his problems could have been solved if he just took aim and shot the guy. But alas, he decided differently. The French woman and the baby. What exactly was the point of this scene? I mean, obviously it was a bit of a break from the action, and it was, I guess, a character development moment with Schofield, but I didn't understand the poem that he was reciting to the baby. I tried to pick out certain words or certain meanings in this poem to see if it had anything to do with the fact that you just discovered a family. Well, they're not even really a family because the mother doesn't know. Well, she's not the mother. It's just a woman, and she found a baby, and now she's taking care of her. But I think one of the problems is that the poem keeps using the word see. Now, maybe I'm just dumb, but I didn't know if it was S-E-E or S-E-A. I think it was S-E-A. I think I've come to comprehend that after a second viewing. But that in and of itself made it so encrypted that I just couldn't figure out what Schofield was trying to say as he talks to this baby. Now, maybe I'm looking a little too much into it. Maybe Schofield was just trying to regain a sense of humanity, and he was just trying to establish some kind of connection with a baby. He didn't really know what to say, so he just said a poem. Could be as simple as that, and that's cool. But if there was any kind of meaning behind it, it was lost on me, and I didn't really understand the point of the whole scene anyway, because he meets this woman, gives her all of his food, and then leaves. That's essentially what happens. And I guess if you wanted to compare it to The Death of Blake, it is effective in the sense that it clearly communicated the horrors of war. Sometimes you come across someone whom you want to help, they're in a horrible situation, and you just can't do anything about it because the mission is more important. So if that was the point of the scene, then it was effective. But once they threw that little bit of poetry in there, and I was trying to figure out the difference between S-E-E and S-E-A, I was just lost. Still a good movie. It was still really fun to watch. I just wonder if they took the one-shot format out and it was like a regular movie with all kinds of cuts, if it would be getting the same hype, or if it would be getting the same level of praise. Now, that might be a bit of a catch-22 because it's like, okay, is the movie good because it's a one-shot? Or does the one-shot make people think it's good? Or is the one-shot format blinding people from legitimate criticism? Or is the story actually good just through the one shot? So yeah, I just wanted to communicate a few of my criticisms that I was subconsciously holding back in my first review because I didn't want to actually believe that it could have any flaws, but here we are, and it definitely has flaws. So I'm going to knock down my original rating of a 9.0 to a 8.0. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next cinematic adventure.